I feel like the number one thing most people know about me, because I have only like 3 hobbies, and one of them is my major. So my major is screenwriting, which I absolutely love and is a really big part of my life. And so as a result of that, just sort of within the film and TV industry in general right now, and especially as like a woman and like a non-white woman about to enter the industry, the whole topic of diversity and female representation and all that stuff is sort of a big one that we like to talk about a lot. So today I'm here to, again, talk about the myth of the strong female character. And we're going to answer 3 basic questions. The first one being, what is it? What is that myth? The second one being, why does it matter? And the third one being, what does it have to do with the 15 of us or whatever that are sitting in this room? So again, regardless of how great your knowledge of film or TV is, as you probably know, there's been a big push as of recent toward diversity and representation, blah, blah, blah. So it's good to think about kind of where we came from. What is the old model compared to the direction we're moving in now? When we think about, we'll say female characters, but certainly top name actresses of, say, the last 50 or 60 years, during what many people would consider the golden era of Hollywood, right back when we made good movies, unlike now. We can think about what did those women look like, what kind of characters did they portray. And as you can tell, right, vast majority, if not all of them, were white. Most of them were blonde, very stereotypically feminine in terms we would think of, although part of that is just cultural differences of like how actual women actually like did dress or behave or the kinds of roles they filled in society. They were always a love interest, always a love interest. Even if that wasn't their only trait, you're hard pressed to find a movie poster from the 40s through the 60s that didn't have like a swooning woman on the front. She could also be smart, also be brave, also have other attributes, but she was always first and maybe foremost love interest. Usually a co-star, usually second to her male counterpart. Sometimes that could be up in the air, but again, the persistence of there has to be a love interest for her, of course. Now, some women, people in general, would disagree. Some people say that we had the best opportunity for both actresses and for like real female characters, say 50-ish years ago. With the idea being that we had films like All About Eve, we had directors that were really interested in telling interesting, unique stories about women, and all those women weren't pushovers. They weren't just women who stayed at home. They they had interests, they had passions, they were willing to stand up to their male counterparts. And while certainly in instances I absolutely agree that it's not like we have never made great movies until recently, or that the world is not ripe with incredibly interesting actresses and characters that have taken part in our cinematic history. If you look at some of those examples, right, so if you think of Singin' in the Rain, or if you think of Roman Holiday, or you think of everything Hitchcock ever made, sure, there were strong, usually white, but always strong, powerful, interesting women in those movies. But they tend to have the common theme of they were feisty, right? If they would stand up against, to represent what they thought or what they said, but they usually fell in love with whoever that guy was in the end anyway. So while they might have tried to resist, to hold their ground, to have whatever, to disagree, in the end they pretty much always succumb to the charms of whoever their male counterpart, or sometimes even the antagonist is. Now again, right, we're doing a lot to remedy this. This is not the 1940s or the 1950s or even the 1970s. We've, as an industry, largely in TV, but also in film, we've made a lot of changes. We're seeing a lot more different kinds of women come to the screen. And just as, if not more importantly, different kinds of women who create those women. TV is a very hot time to be a woman and like to be me, like right now TV is like, it's a really good time like to be a non-white woman who wants to write for TV, because everyone wants to hire you. You have women like Shonda Rhimes, who's the showrunner on Grey's Anatomy and Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder. You have women like Jill Soloway, who's the showrunner on Transparent. You have women like Lena Dunham and Amy Schumer and all the women from SNL. Right, so we really do have a powerhouse of interesting women. A lot of this conversation is in part a result of sort of the availability of social media, right? If you have been aware of such trends as like the Oscars so white or the whitewashed out hashtag on Twitter, started by Margaret Cho, who's an Asian American comedian, in response largely to Ghost in the Shell, right? All this talk about yellowface and whitewashing and representation of Asian characters, as with Scarlett Johansson, who was the lead in Ghost in the Shell, and there was evidence to suggest that they tried to run tests on her. She's playing what was historically a Japanese character, and that there was evidence to suggest they ran screen tests on the video to make her look more Asian. Or we have movies like Aloha with Emma Stone, where she played a half Asian woman as Emma Stone. I love Emma Stone. Pretty sure she's not any part Asian. Or things like that. But we do see a very fundamental change in how the industry is working, which is great. Again, it's a great time to be a woman in TV, and we're definitely seeing an explosion of more, as we say, female-driven content. Although I'm still not sure what that means. So let's look at the new model. If we kind of know where we came from, right, in this era where women were predominantly the love interest, predominantly more docile, right, in their character behavior. Well, then what do we have now? How has that changed? Now, part of this is hard to characterize because we make a lot more movies than we used to. So to make any broad generalizations to say, like, well, all women are weak or strong or white or not, I mean, that's not really fair because we produce a lot of content, especially with TV and streaming. But I think you can still notice some broad trends, right? And one of them, so again, looking at those same criteria we had on the old model, right? It's still undisputable that most, if not all, female leads or female characters in general do go to white women. There's now a larger push, certainly in response to, say, like the Oscars so white thing, right? Of like, we do make more, I guess, sort of like African-American centric stories, right? But again, those stories are almost always like the same three stories. There's like the slave story, there's the segregation story, there's the, and absolutely those are very important, interesting stories that should be talked about, but that they haven't quite bled over into a point of like, we're just telling stories about women that aren't white. It's like, no, you get special kinds of stories. Like, we can make a slave movie, and it can be a good slave movie, but it's still a slave movie. And it's like, but why don't we just tell stories about black women, like, doing regular stuff? Or, God forbid, if you're a non-white, non-black woman, like, there may only be 3 black tables at the Oscars, but I guarantee you there are 0 Japanese tables at the Oscars. There's like the one French table, right? So you get like a French director for that. So again, right, you can see some of these traits are more relevant, others not, but especially in sort of the rise of the franchise movie and the action movie, we've developed sort of the exact opposite of where female characters used to fall, right? If female characters used to be very stereotypically feminine, but now we've sort of had a total backlash on that, right? Now female characters are very stereotypically masculine. They are bold, they are outgoing, they are usually really good with weapons, they're very physically fit, foul-mouthed, quick-talking, right? Characteristics that, given that they are, again, not always, but largely conceived of, written, produced, and directed by other men. It's odd, the women we've now created and tell our society of actual women sort of what it is to be a strong woman is essentially to be a man. That now we've broadened those roles, you could say, but they still retain certain traits. They are usually a love interest. They are usually, in the end, saved by their male counterpart. And again, there's this idea of being feisty, of like, but they don't take shit from any guys. Like, they step out and they can protect themselves, but they all secretly want the same things that the women we were writing about in the 40s and 50s wanted, right? Of really, when they say no, go away, you're an asshole, what they really mean is, but we know she's going to fall for him at the end of Act 2, because that's always how it happens. Right, now, obviously, like, I think a lot of these female characters are really great, and some of whom were written by women, some of whom were not, and it's important that the purpose of this talk and the conversation in industry is not like men shouldn't make stuff, or like men can't write women, or men, like, it's not a boys versus girls thing, but it's just examining how we actually portray women, while recognizing that this is still very much the product of a male-dominated system. I hate being the person that's gonna like read to you verbatim, but there's this really great article from Cracked, which if you haven't seen, you should definitely check out. It's called 7 Reasons So Many Guys Don't Understand Sexual Consent. And I'm just gonna read to you a quick little blurb that I think sort of ties back to this idea of like, well, women are feisty, but they're waiting to be overcome. So in his words, rather than recount the thousands and thousands of examples of the assault them until they love you seduction method, I'm going to prove how prevalent this is by rattling off a list of examples using only Harrison Ford's filmography. In Blade Runner, he slams a woman, or female replicant, against a wall after she tries to leave and then forces her to say, "Kiss me." She acts terrified right up until they start having sex. In Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Ford snatches a fleeing woman with his whip and yanks her back to him. They fall in love. In Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, he forces a kiss, the woman pulls away and says, "How dare you kiss me?" and then kisses him back passionately. Long before I was old enough to date or even had female friends, one thing was made very clear. In any relationship, men are the predators, women are the prey. their expressions of fear and rejection, including defensive physical attacks, are a coy game to be overcome, like a tricky clasp on a bra. So I think that's interesting, right? Of while again we've made a lot of progress both socially and certainly culturally over many decades, there's still this very prevalent theme of like, but when women say no, they really mean yes. And somehow the bigger the bazookas and the tinier their skirts and the more that they say, no, I don't need a man, what they really mean is they're just looking for a stronger man to come take care of them, seduce them, or save them. So conversely, right, the second dominant thing that tragically most female characters seem to have in common is that they're very pretty. So this is my favorite Twitter account. It was all over my newsfeed like last year. But it's this guy, Ross Putman, who's a producer, and who tweets just the descriptions of female characters he reads in spec scripts. So for those of you who don't know, spec scripts are like scripts that are never going to get made. They're usually original content of like I, the writer, I'm like, hey, I wrote this thing, I submit it to a production company, and they read it. Usually the interns read it, so usually me, or someone like me. So you have a 20-year-old who reads your script while they eat a sandwich. They have some thoughts about it, they send it. So for the sake of anonymity, he's changed all of their names to Jane, but you can still kind of get a sense of what kind of things Jane likes to do in her free time. Now, all of this is sort of funny, but you look at it and you're like, well, you know, it is a social media account. Like, surely he's just kind of cherry-picking the good ones. Doesn't mean they're not real, but like, how prevalent can that actually be? So my internship last spring, I saw this and loved it, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start keeping tabs on the women who I read about in the scripts I read. And I only did it maybe for the last 2 months of my internship, but I loved all of the women I read, not just but all of the women who I read, and I wrote down their log lines. So these are some of mine. Jane, beautiful but pissed. Jane, too blonde and pretty to be so world-weary. Jane, she'd be stunning on any other day. Jane, a busty communications major. Jane, an attractive girl, skinny, blonde hair. And last but not least, Jane, homely, bland, probably pretty if she smiled.
Oh my God.
Regardless of how funny or not funny that is, it is a sort of shockingly accurate look at where those stereotypes come from, and that while for all the talk we have about like, well, Shonda Rhimes is the face of TV, and you know we're having this huge push toward diversity, it's like at the end of the day, like most of what you actually read through still doesn't fall so far from the truth. So given all of this, right, and it's either very funny or very depressing on how you look at it. But why does any of this matter? And by extent, what does this have to do with us? So a lot of this, and I know this is weird to talk about, right? Like I feel like the whole point of going to college, if you go to like a semi-liberal college, is it's all about like learning about your identity and like where do you fit in and whatever. And it's been really interesting over like the last year of like I'm taking Japanese, like I'm really bad at Japanese, like so bad, just embarrassingly bad. I have no idea what's happening. But sort of coming to terms with like where you came from and like how you fit in, and this idea of like I don't know if it ever. It sounds really silly, but like I don't know if it ever occurred to me that I wasn't white. Like I knew I wasn't black, and I'm from a very very white part of the country, so it was like, well, of course, like you know my mom's white, my dad's not. But like I don't know, I lived a pretty white life. Like I don't know that I've ever felt like racially oppressed. So it's like, well, of course, like you're not black, so like you're pretty white, you know, and that's it. But then when you start to talk about representation and like the kinds of women who you look up to, or the kinds of like actors or writers or just people in the world who you see doing well and doing interesting, successful things, and you realize that pretty much all of those people are white, and then there's this very strong sense of like, wow, like, and I'm not. How weird. Like I don't know if it had ever actually occurred to me. Anyway, but the purpose of this story is that all of this sort of, I guess, stereotyping, but just kind of how Hollywood continues to tell the stories that it does. And again, not saying those stories are bad or that we don't make really good movies, but it does perpetrate this idea of whiteness is beautiful and whiteness is normal, and therefore anything that is not whiteness is, I suppose you could say, abnormal and or not beautiful. I was, if you have seen my Facebook cover photo, because like I was like, could I study or I could make a grid of interesting female characters, and I clearly decided to do the latter, right? And of the like, I could really only off the top of my head think of maybe like 3 or 4 like TV or film characters that I would personally consider very iconic who weren't white at all, and only one of them was Asian. Like I was like Christina from Grey's Anatomy, like dope, but other than that, I was like I literally can't think of anyone I know, right? And that's weird. Again, like I don't know, is that bad? specific idea of femininity, right? That whether you have the hypersensual woman from a few decades ago or the sort of aggressively masculine woman, the aggressively masculine action woman we have now, it still sort of says basic things about what women want. That women want to be dominated, women want to be taken care of, women want to be saved, those kinds of things. Also just the power dynamics between men and women, that while women can dress up different and like have guns and like pretend to be powerful, at the end of the day, they're not in the way that their male counterparts are. And it also perpetrates this idea of sameness. Like all women are the same. Like, oh, well in the past, all women were very docile, and now all women are very aggressive, and like, that's what womanhood is. And regardless of how you feel about either of the stereotypes, just that's not true. Like, in a way that I don't know men have ever suffered that in film specifically. I think you could argue that men still are held to certain sorts of beauty standards that do definitely adhere to like whiteness is a attractive trait in a man, where like being an Asian man is not an attractive trait, you know, things like that. But as far as like the actual personality that a man should have, if you were to look at the history of film, I think you would be pleasantly surprised in the vast variety of interesting men we've created in a way that all of the women feel very similar. So I think the answer to this problem, right, of how do you create real strong female characters is about humanization. It's about creating women that are real people. And there are real women people in the world who want to be moms. There are real women people in the world who want to stay home with their kids. There are real women people in the world who don't want kids at all. There are girls who love girls, and girls who love boys, and girls who want to be doctors, and girls who don't. And those women are all very real. And we were kind of having this discussion in one of my screenwriting classes. I had a guy, a white guy in my class, who I think is very smart, I think is a good writer, reading his script. We read the first 15 pages of his script. There's only 2 women who appear in the script at all. One of them is an AI, who's his assistant, who's just a voiceover, which is fine. And the other one is the main character's wife, whose name is Annabelle. And Annabelle's logline reads something like, Annabelle, beautiful, fragile, quiet. I was like, and things Annabelle likes to do include put on lipstick in the nude, and has lines like, you're just so strong, honey. Thanks for taking care of me, honey. And we're giving notes, and I was like, I used to be afraid to give this note. And certainly as a freshman, it really freaked me out. You don't want to be that girl in the class that like raises your hand and you're like, I think your script's kind of sexist. Because like, oh no, like, you sound terrible, you sound like a nag. And it's like, I've really gotten over like, you need to be kind about it, but like, that is actually a note that you can give. And I raised my hand and I was like, look, I was like, you know, I think your script's good, you've got great story stuff. I was like, but the fact that the only female character you have sounds like she walked out of a Mad Men franchise and has 3 lines and is wearing no clothes, I was like, that's kind of not cool. And he looks at me 100% totally honest, and he goes, why? And I was like, why is that a problem? And he was like, well, yeah, like I'm allowed to write whatever kind of women I want, right? Like who are you to tell me that that's not a strong female character? And I think what he was getting at is she wasn't the second group of women, right? I think he thought I was like, she needs to have a bazooka and be angry and then she'd be strong. Like, and that's not really the point, but like, it's about creating characters that have depth. Because at the end of the day, as a writer or as a creative individual, if you're not creating characters and you're not creating stories that are dynamic, you're just not very good at your job. It has nothing to do with your gender or the gender of the people that you create. Now, again, back to the screenwriting nerd stuff, right? If you Google best screenwriters of all time, you know, it does the little Google thing, and there's like a million of them that come up. All of them are men, except one, Diablo Cody, who wrote Juno, does come up. Everyone else is a man, and all of them are basically white guys. But what does all of this say, right? Is the point of this, like, well, men should just fall off the earth and stop writing things? And the answer is absolutely not. That's ridiculous. I think all of these men are very talented and both can and do write excellent female characters and have written great stories that people in general, regardless of their gender, relate to and enjoy and all of that stuff. So the point of this is in no way that men should go away or stop writing about women. So lastly, what does this have to do with us? Right, like really actually on a practical level of like, do we have any other Dodge kids in the room? Yeah. Couple, great. Like creative writing, anything? No. Yeah, okay, so we've got a few. Right, but then you guys are like, why the hell am I here? Like, what does that have to do with me? And I just, in thinking about a topic for this talk, and like, you know, I'm very loud, and there's lots of things I like to talk about, but I felt like it was very fitting that for talking with a group of very smart, strong, empowered women, that this was what I wanted to bring to the table, because at the end of the day, regardless of whether or not you're a writer or an actor, or you have any interest in working in film at all, the point is that it's about representing the kind of women you really know. And it's about the way that you get out of the myth of the strong female character, be it that she's angry and has a bazooka, or she's docile and likes to make tea, is that there aren't really any women that are like either of those women. Because both of those are pretty one-dimensional portrayals of sort of a stereotype of person that never happened. In a way that, when we think back on history and it's sort of like how we think about World War II, I don't know that there were really actually people in the 40s that were like the people we think of when we think of World War II, right? It's like sort of this weird amalgamation of historic experiences that we believe must have happened to someone, but kind of didn't. We're creating this idea of personhood that's not really grounded in anything. And so I think how this relates back to all of us is that the way you create real diversity, right? Racial, as a non-white woman, I do believe racial diversity is very important, but I think we've now gotten to a place where we're still making exactly the same kind of movies, it's just now we're plopping women in the middle of them, or now we're plopping non-white women in the middle, and we're going, look, we're being diverse. It's that's not being diverse though, you're still only making one kind of thing. And it's not a matter of cramming in certain kinds of people, it's about really actually telling a wide variety of stories. And the way you do that is by having a wide variety of storytellers who are able to be in touch with their own lives and with their own experiences. And that all of this is about supporting each other as fellow women, be it as fellow artists or just fellow peers or sisters or what have you. And in the same way that real actual modern day feminism is about the right to choose, it is not about saying everyone should get an abortion or saying everyone should be bisexual or everyone should. No one is supposed to be anything. It's about defending your peers' right to live the life they want. And similarly, I think the way you crack down on this myth is by allowing the characters and the worlds you build to be the people that they are. And that's fine. And we're not trying to make everyone an angry feminist, we're just trying to create better, more interesting stories that are a better representation of the women we know. So that was all from me.